Good afternoon. My name is Paul Rudensky. I'm the director of JewishGen and the Peter and Mary Calico Center for Jewish Genealogy Research here at the Museum of Jewish Heritage in New York City. I want to just say a few words about our talk today. Most American Jews are descendants of Jews who immigrated to the United States from Eastern and Central Europe at the end of the 19th century and the beginning of the 20th century. And almost all of these people would identify as Ashkenazi Jews, meaning that they spoke Yiddish and they were descendants of Jews who had immigrated to Eastern Europe in the Middle Ages and beyond. Ashkenazi Jews created a robust culture in every sphere. However, due to immigration, the Holocaust, and language changes, connecting with the Ashkenazi past has been a formidable challenge for many people. We are fortunate today to have JewishGen's chief genealogist, Caitlin Hollander Waas, introduce us to the field of Ashkenazi Jewish genealogy. Hopefully, Caitlin will be able to remove some of the mystery for us and make our rich past more accessible to us all. Caitlin will give her presentation, and then we will have time for questions. Please enter your questions in the chat. This is a series of webinars that are given on Wednesday afternoons over Zoom. Our next talk will be on November 12th with Professor Sarah Benor from the Hebrew Union College, and she will be speaking on the topic of Jewish heritage words connecting to our ancestors and our communities. On November 19th, Professor George Blumen will be speaking about Sugihara Jews and their descendants, and this will be given from a genealogical point of view. We are still scheduling talks, so please stay tuned since we will be adding more programs. I'd like to say a word about Caitlin, and after that, I'm going to turn the floor over to her. Caitlin Hollander Waas is JewishGen's chief genealogist, as well as being on staff at the Peter and Mary Calico Center for Jewish Genealogy Research here at the Museum of Jewish Heritage. She has been a professional genealogist for over a decade, beginning in the world of forensic genealogy, specializing in high-value estate cases, as well as researching for private clients and consulting for books. In addition, her citizenship reclamation work has been featured in Family Tree magazine, The Times of Israel, and the South Florida Sun Sentinel, among other publications. She holds a degree in anthropology, as well as additional certificates in Jewish studies and Holocaust and genocide studies. She is a cherished colleague here at JewishGen in the museum, and I am honored to present her today. Just again, a reminder, please join us for our upcoming talks, which I will mention at the end of our program today. And without further ado, I'm really pleased to turn the floor over now to Caitlin Hollander Waas.
All right, so hi everybody. Thank you, Paul, for that very kind introduction. So this is Sunrise Sunset, beginning your journey into Ashkenazi Jewish genealogy. And can everybody see my presentation? Okay, perfect. That's good to know. Always good. So I'm going to assume that you're coming from a place where you know some basics of genealogy, what's genealogy, all of that good stuff. So why is this area of genealogy different from all other areas? There's different record sets, different social, cultural norms, different applicable laws, different what I call push and pull factors with immigration, which I'll go into a little bit more in detail, but essentially think of it as the thing that pushes you to leave a place or the thing that pulls you to a new one. Usually both are at play with immigration and emigration. However, depending on the time period, one could be more in effect, most commonly with the push factor. And then there's also a different set of concerns when you are researching. You're going to be looking at the potentials for records loss. You're going to be looking at, in the Ashkenazi world, the majority of it, a lack of surnames once you reach a certain point. And of course, the impacts of genocide on the genealogical record. Okay. On top of that, so this is going to be the first thing that I'm going to say, and this is going to be more theory than execution. Historical context is going to be everything when you're doing this research. The shifting borders in Europe can determine how somebody identifies their place of birth. Are you from Austria? Are you from Russia? Are you from Romania, Hungary? There are laws that exist historically that are only applicable to the Jewish population that can completely impact anything from where does the person's birth be registered to what surname are they using. And there are also a lot of things on the topic of names that follow long forgotten patterns and long forgotten cultural norms. I like to tell people that what I do isn't the dates, it's the dash. So records are going to give you the dates. They're going to tell you when was somebody married, when was somebody born, when did somebody die. The context is what gives us the dash, that little line in between born and died. So for example, we have in front of us the dates of life of my great-great-grandfather. Now, those are dates, those are numbers, 1866 to 1943. However, with the context, we know that he was a victim of the Holocaust. The context of what was happening where he was living and the community that he belonged to gives us the additional information. So we'll start at the beginning, or at least the beginning of the name. What's in a first name? I like to categorize names, especially in the Ashkenazi world, in three categories. There's first names, ritual names, and then what we like to call use names, so the name that somebody's using casually. I'll give an example with myself. I have a Hebrew name, I have a name in English, and then a number of my friends call me Kat. It's a nickname. So when we're looking at, for example, this record, neither of these two people who were born in the Austro-Hungarian Empire were born Isidore or Fanny. Those aren't their birth names. Those also aren't their religious names. They both have a Yiddish name and a Hebrew name. There's also the issue of double names. In Hebrew, I'm Shoshana Chaya. That's a double name, so that's not a first name, middle name, it's a double name. Sometimes these are linguistically logical, which I'll go into a minute, and sometimes they're not. What I mean by linguistically logical, for example, if you're looking at someone named Arya Leib, that's lion, lion, just in Hebrew and Yiddish. Sarah Malka, queen, queen. Sometimes you'll see Esther Malka. Well, that makes sense. Esther was a queen. Or Yehuda Leib. Well, the symbol of the tribe of Judah is a lion. So those are all linguistically very logical. They all make 100% sense when you look at the translations. Sometimes they're not so linguistically logical, though, which in and of itself can be extremely useful. I was working on a family where one of the names was Eliezer Yitzhak. Okay, that's not that common. I'm not going to be running into many people with that name. And that enabled me to untie and find out what the actual original surname was. Similarly, you'll see names that are unusual repeat in a family. When you start to see these names repeat, it can help you reassure yourself that you're on the right track. So in this case, we're looking at a marriage certificate from New York City in 1907 specifically. And this is a marriage between a pair of second cousins. And, you know, we know that they have the same surname. We know they're from the same town. But if we look at their fathers' names, both of their fathers are named Tobias Hollander, Tovia. And in this case, their fathers are first cousins named for a common ancestor. That little additional bit of information can sort of reassure us that, yes, we're looking at the right families, and we're also looking at pursuing the same family by looking at both of these people. Now, on top of that, we also have Ashkenazi naming traditions, which I know most of you are going to be familiar with. Essentially, you don't name for the living. So if I'm looking at a set of, we'll say, 5 siblings, and all of a sudden, one year, they all start naming their sons Benjamin. I'm going to go, okay, who died? Is it one of your grandfathers? Is it your father? Who died who's named Benjamin that all of you are naming a child after? Because there is something that just happened here that made every single one of these people, and often it is even across continents, start to name their children after Benjamin. It can also kind of give you an idea of when somebody has died. So if I'm, cross-referencing, let's say I have 5 records of a Benjamin Schmidt who might be the right Benjamin. I know that the 5 that were alive after these Benjamins start appearing aren't going to be my Benjamin. So it's on that topic, if you're also looking at people and say, these might be siblings, but I'm not 100% sure. Their death records don't have their parents' names on them. I don't have a marriage record for them. I don't have a grave for them. Or the grave doesn't have any Hebrew, which is very frustrating. If you start to look at the way that they're naming their children, okay, sure, I don't know if these 2 men are brothers, but the same year they both name a daughter Malka. And I know that one of them says his mother's name is Malka. And then the same year they name a child, we'll say Benjamin. Okay, so this is starting to give us a pattern. And when we start to look at these patterns, we start to look at the name inheritance, it can help you draw familial ties. Graves are essential. I do always say this. When a grave does not have Hebrew on it, I tend to be very frustrated. It gives you the name of the father, gives you the Hebrew name, and they are more likely to be correct than a death certificate. Death certificates are filled out at the time of death. They tend to be the least reliable vital record because the person about whom the record is not obviously present to fill in the information. The parents of a child are present at the birth. They can fill in the name of the child, their names. The bride and the groom are present at a marriage. They fill in their information. The person who's dead not only is not present, but the person filling out that information is usually in a state of great emotional distress. Death certificates very often have errors, or the person didn't know. So if a grave is put up a year later, there's a lot more time to get the correct information. So I'll give you a case study. We mentioned a Tobias Hollander. We'll give it Tobias Hollander. So we have this wonderful death certificate. Great. Newark, New Jersey. And it says his father's name is Sidney and his mother's name is Hannah. Okay, well, who filled it out? In this case, the backside of this, it does tell us that, his son, actually, it is on this side of it. His son, Sidney Hollander, filled it out. So his son is like, oh, yeah, I was named after my grandfather. His son actually wasn't. His son was named for the other grandfather. Because then we have this grave, Tobias Hollander. On this, we have Tuvia, son of Abraham Yaakov. So these two documents give us totally different things. In this case, I can tell you for a fact it is the second one. But when I saw this death certificate, I was very concerned because this Tobias was supposed to be the brother of my great-great-grandfather. And I knew my great-great-grandfather's name was Abraham Yaakov. So I see this death certificate, I see Sidney. Who's Sidney? But of course, because his children put up the grave a year later, because it was everybody involved, because they were pulling from religious records, they were able to confirm that no, his father's name was in fact Abraham Yaakov. So another thing we run into very frequently, especially with immigrant populations, is name changing. So a lot of the time they follow a pattern. You'll see Shia, Ovsi, and he's Oscar. Okay, that makes sense. We'll see Svi, who's Hirsch or Herschel, and now they're calling him Harry in English. Jacob, Jack is very easy. Bela to Bella, Lieb to Lewis. Those make total sense. And then sometimes you need a little bit of context. One of the most commonly confusing name equivalencies is the name Yehoshua to Falk. So why are we calling this Yehoshua Falk and then all of a sudden he becomes Frank? What's this? He should be Joshua. The answer lies in medieval German Jewish poetry. Not where you thought I was going, I'm sure. Now, if you think about a falcon, how does a bird of prey hunt? It circles above its prey, circles, and then it swoops in. Now think about Joshua at Jericho. They circle the city, and then they breach the gates. So when you're looking at a lot of medieval liturgical poetry specifically, there's a lot of comparison of Joshua to a falcon, Falk. And so those two names become intertwined, even if the reason for the intertwining isn't readily apparent. Sometimes there's also no pattern at all, or sometimes the pattern is hidden. A good example of this is actually this naturalization document. This is one of my great-grandfathers, Murray Laubstein. He says, hey, I came to America as Abram Lobstein. Abram Lobstein, what's this? Then I pull the petition file for this. And in it, they actually had a very difficult time finding his original immigration. Why? Because he arrived as Abram. And so there is a letter from his rabbi that says, just so you're aware, he's Moshe Abram. Okay, so he's using Murray in America. That's half the name. But for some reason on the ticket, we ended up with Abram. So where this name change doesn't seem to make much sense, we all of a sudden realize it's not really a name change. He's just using a different half of his name. Surnames are, as I like to tell everybody, they're new. They're very new and they're very, very flexible. Most of the Ashkenazi world, excepting a few very specific outliers, Hamburg, Frankfurt, Prague, you're going to see surnames emerge around the turn of the 19th century. So usually it's between 1796 to 1825, sometimes even as late as 1845. There are exceptions to this. Romanian Jews are the largest exception to this. Most of them tend to be surname resistant well into the 20th century, which makes research there a special challenge. So another thing I like to tell people is that there's no such thing as a Jewish last name. You know, most of the time when we're thinking, oh, this is a Jewish last name, it's something Germanic or Slavic. These surnames are so recent, unless the surname has a very specific Jewish tie, like Chazan, Levi, Cohen, which is sometimes Jewish, but there are non-Jewish Cohens that come from a completely different root. Rabinowitz, son of the rabbi, that's going to be Jewish. Yankelevich, son of Yankel, that's Jewish. But something like Goldberg, it's Germanic. And now, something I always tell people is that surname inheritance can cause complications. Coming from an Anglo-centric worldview, you're used to somebody inheriting the surname of their father. Okay, yeah, obviously a couple gets married, they inherit dad's surname. Well, not in Galicia, which is where many, many people's ancestors will have come from. It's a province of the former Austro-Hungarian Empire. Think Krakow, think Lviv. In September of 1726, Charles IV stated that only one member of a Jewish family can form a household and legally marry. 1789, restriction on the number of marriages is removed, but as of 1810, Galicianer Jews have to pass a test based on a pretty anti-Semitic book, actually, written by a man who had converted from Judaism to Christianity, in order to legally marry. Now, the Galicianer restrictions are only lifted in 1868. There's also a marriage tax in that same time period. That marriage tax is equivalent to over a year of your income. So, if you have to pass an anti-Semitic test and pay over a year of your income in order to tell the Kaiser that you've gotten married, are you going to do it? Or going to go to the rabbi, have a chuppah? Who needs to know? So Jews in Austria, Bohemia, Moravia, most of Hungary are super compliant. Not super compliant, but they tend to be much more compliant than Galicianers with the civil registration requirements. Galicianers are not. So about 85% of the Jewish births in this province are illegitimate. Their parents are married. Often these people will be together for their entire lives. But because they are legally illegitimate, because these marriages are not registered with the crown, these children inherit their mother's surnames. So an example of this would be my great-grandfather. On the left, you see his 1904 birth registration. Bernhard, he's listed in this case as illegitimate. However, there's a nice little note there that says, hey, 1914, he's legitimized by the marriage of his parents. And it's entry number 29, in case anybody was wondering. This is fantastic for me because while the 1914 marriages weren't indexed, they were available. I was able to put in a request to the archive. And sure enough, I show up with the record on the right that tells me that Kjell Hollander, who's the son of Abram Hollander and Henny from Moschenishka, that he marries Zussel Grun, who I know is Bernhard's mother. So this record gives me a lot of this information. I know in my case, this was because the family was about to emigrate to Germany. And so they're getting all their paperwork in order. But this document shows he's 10 years old when he's legitimized, but his parents are very much together. They're having many other children in this time period. They're married. It's just a paperwork snafu. So back to name changes. Sometimes you'll see names change. It's a literal translation. So Kupferschmidt to coppersmith, Grun to green. Sometimes they're shortenings. My husband has a line of his that are Amdursky. They're also Amdur. Sometimes you'll see it shortened and anglicized a little bit. Rubenstein to Robbins. Sometimes you'll see what I call yekkification, which is not a real word, but I'm trying to make it be a real word, where essentially somebody will say, okay, well, I might be an Eastern European Jew, but I'm going to make my name sound a little bit more German because those are the fancy Jews. And I'm trying to join this other part of society. It's a class-related movement as opposed to a religious-related movement. It's why a lot of the time you'll see people have a name that still sounds Jewish, just a little bit less Eastern European. You'll see this in other countries as well. In Israel, I have a branch of my family, the Hollanders, who became the Israelis. You'll see this in Hungary, especially in the late 19th century. People will Megarize their name. They'll make it more Hungarian sounding. And in the Second Polish Republic, you'll see spellings and names shift to be more Polish. It's related to themes of assimilation, related to themes of nationalism, national identity, and often trying to move up in the world of business in countries that are not so welcoming to Jews. So names are also flexible. Something I like to tell people is spelling isn't real, which we hate, but it's not. Kosovsky and Kosovsky, those are the same name. Even today, when you look at hockey players or any other athlete from a country that uses Cyrillic, I use hockey players as an example because there's lots of Russian hockey players, you'll notice that their names are not consistently spelled a specific way depending on what publication and what document it is until later on in their careers. You're going to see this as well with your ancestors, especially if they're speaking Yiddish in a country which uses the Cyrillic alphabet and then they're moving to a country with Latin characters. There are a lot of shifts that can happen, and it really does come down to the phonetics of the thing. Names translate. Yaakov is Jacob. There's also regional nicknames. Mordechai could be Moltol. He could be Mordko. He could be Monek. So again, context. So I'll pull up another case study. It's what I call a man with many names. January 17th, 1776, my fifth great-grandfather is born in what's now Germany at the time. It was not Germany because Germany does not exist in 1776. He's given a Hebrew name. Hebrew name's on his grave. It's also on this record. It says he's Eliezer ben Binyamin Asher. He's Eliezer, the son of Benjamin Asher. However, he owns a sweet shop. So in everyday use, he's Zussman Benjamin. He's Sweet Man, the Sweet Man, son of Benjamin. Okay, that makes sense. And then in 1808, Napoleon's there. He needs to adopt a surname, so he adopts the name Andre, and the family takes the surname Schweitzer. Okay, this is great. When the region becomes the German Confederation, because he does live a very long life, he Germanizes. He becomes Andreas. So we have this man with many, many names. Each of these names makes sense within the context that he's living at the time. And the changing of the names deals with two things. Number one, what laws are applying to him? As I said, different laws apply to Jews. And number two, what's the political situation? So even though he never moves, he is born and dies in the same town, he has many, many names. On top of this, and I did touch on this earlier, there are cultural factors in marriage. This is something that we need to keep in mind. They're cultural factors that don't always occur to us today, but they're very important even less than 100 years ago. First of all, people are likely to marry their siblings' widow or widower. Second or third spouse is going to be related to either the survivor or the deceased spouse. Two reasons for this. First of all, there is a religious imperative, specifically for brothers of a childless man. However, if you see a man with young children lose his wife, often the second wife will be a relative of the first or of him, because this is how you avoid an evil stepmother. She already loves the children. She's related to them. Maybe they're her nieces and nephews. It's an easier transition for the children, and she's likely not going to mistreat them. You often see with a marriage, even if it's in another country, the congregation is associated with the town. In this case, I mentioned before this pair of second cousins who marry, they are marrying at the Novi Sanzer synagogue. They're marrying in a congregation that is associated with their hometown. And then there's what we like to call the consanguinity issue. Cousin marriages are going to be the norm, not the exception. It's not something that we think about in this day and age, but historically speaking, it is going to be the norm. Don't be surprised to see it. And it can make it easier to trace family members. I mentioned earlier that knowing that both of this members of this couple had a father who was Tobias Hollander, that they're from the same town, made it much easier to say, yes, these two people are related. However, it means you can get people mixed up. You know, if you have 6 people in a town and all of their surnames is Goldberg, and then one year, every single one of them has a Pinchas Goldberg. And now you have a whole bunch of little Pinchas Goldbergs with the same birth year running around. You can start to get people mixed up pretty quickly. I like to tell people to use it as a tool. Don't look at it as, okay, well, this is something weird that my ancestors did, or, oh, this just makes my life harder. Use it as a tool. I like to have a list of what I call my red flag surnames. A lot of them are very common surnames, like Hollander. However, If I see certain families interacting with each other, I say, okay, this is probably my family, because there are certain families that my family very much likes and is very much intertwined with over the generations. When I say consanguinity versus endogamy, by the way, consanguinity is when you are marrying a close relative. Endogamy, which tends to be the word that we sort of incorrectly use in this context, it's marriage within a specific group. So consanguinity is on the micro level, endogamy is on the macro. And so it's been a thing in the Jewish community for a very long time. This is actually an excerpt from the 1906 Jewish Encyclopedia on the topic, titled Consanguinity Among Jews. There's a whole, lengthy conversation of this. I highly recommend looking it up. The full text is online. So why? There's no really easy answer. Large families, small populations mean after time, everybody's kind of related. But, why does this continue in places like Krakow or Warsaw or Berlin, where there are pretty sizable Jewish populations? There's familiarity. The other family's known. If you're marrying off your daughter, you know that your brother raised his son correctly, and you also know you're going to see her again. You know that if her husband dies, that the family's going to take care of her, even if you're not around to see it. That familiarity is a huge deal, and it's a huge way of protecting your child when you're marrying them off. There's also religious reasons. The Talmud recommends that a person marry his niece. Aunt-nephew marriage is strictly forbidden, but this isn't always followed in practice. You do occasionally see it, although it is not so often, and when you do see it, it's typically a half aunt. So now that we've touched on a lot dealing with people, we're going to hit on another very important topic. I like to call it the where problem. Where are my ancestors from? Seems like it should be an easy answer, but then you say, oh yeah, my grandfather said he was from Russia, and you're like, what does that even mean? So what does this mean? So this is the map of Europe in 1914. And now I've overlaid these borders over the modern day borders. So let me see if I can get this to work. I did. So we have a completely different map taking shape here. Germany is a completely different size. Poland emerges, Ukraine emerges. All of these countries from these former empires that fragment after the First World War emerge. So what somebody might be saying, oh, I'm from Austria. Well, yes, but you left in 1910. Today we're going to call it Ukraine. Today we're going to call it Poland. Today we're going to call it Czechia. Oh, I'm from Hungary. Well, today it's Romania. So always keep in mind that the country, you need to look at the map from the time period, not just, where is it today? Because the concept of something like Russia, where most Jews were not allowed to even reside within the borders of what we would call modern day Russia, it's a very different concept than it is in, we'll say, 1900. So it can be a matter of identity. Wow. Somebody says, oh, well, I'm German. I'm Austrian. It can also depend on where the question is being asked. When is it being asked and by whom? You'll see sometimes somebody who's very clearly aware of where their former hometown is, answering censuses differently year to year. Why? Well, I was born in Austria, but today it's Czechoslovakia. I was born in Russia, but today it's Poland. So look at the differences on different censuses. Again, the 1910 and 1930 census can differ hugely because the borders have changed. And then the immigration date can be a clue. What do I mean by that? Like I said, it's all about context. So what does that mean? I like to identify 6 major waves of Jewish immigration to the United States. You see similar waves all over the world. There's obviously more immigration than this, and there are also people who are outliers in these communities and come at different times. But in general, this is going to be your major 6 waves. First of all, the earliest wave is going to be the Sephardic wave. There are obviously Ashkenazim that do come to the United States in this period. However, the majority of immigrants in this period are going to be Sephardi. That overlaps with the German Jewish immigration, really peaks in 1830 to 1850. I mentioned those push-pull factors. In this case, we're looking at political instability. Then we have the 1870s to 1924, what I'll call the Austrian immigration. We mean the former Austro-Hungarian Empire. Motivations here range from anti-Semitism to economic factors, We have cholera outbreaks that are causing massive waves of death. People want to leave. And there is also obviously the issue of oppression. And then you have from 1881 to 1924, the Russian immigration line. This one has two very specific causes. 1881, you're looking at the assassination of Tsar Alexander II. Like most things that happen, it was very easy to blame the Jews for this, and so you have a wave of pogroms that begin. Similarly, 1904, you have the Kishinev pogrom. Another wave of pogroms breaks out. When there's a wave of pogroms, you see immigration increase because there's your push factor. 1924 is when this all stops. That's when the United States passes what's called the Johnson-Reed Act, which essentially restricted immigration based on the percentage of people of that origin who were in the United States in 1880. In practice, this essentially stops immigration from anywhere but Northwestern Europe. It's a major issue, and it is why you're going to see immigration cut off this year for most of the Ashkenazi world. So the next big wave starts in 1947. 1947 to 1955, you're seeing post-Holocaust refugees arrive. And then 1988 to 1995, you're seeing the Soviet Jews arrive. Obviously, there are more immigration waves in this, but these are going to be the 6 major ones that you're going to be looking at. So what matters is the town. Borders change, your town stays put. So there are multiple ways to research this. Look at where they're buried. Are they buried in a society related to the town, a Landsmannschaft? Are they attending a synagogue related to a town, like the 2 Hollanders I mentioned earlier were? Keep in mind that town names do vary depending on languages. Novi Sans, New Sans, Sans. The best resource for this is going to be the JewishGen Town Finder. How do you find this? Go to our website, open Discover, and see that nice little thing, Town Finder Communities Database? You go there. You're going to open it up. It's going to give you this wonderful little thing. And you're going to type in the Jewish community. You're going to want a phonetic search. Why? Spelling isn't real. People are going to write down what they hear. Spelling isn't real. In this case, we'll put in New Sense. Okay, that's where my great-grandfather says he's from on his naturalization documents. You push search, and this is the answer I get. Not only does it give me the modern-day name of this town and the names in various languages, but it also gives me a timeline of when this town is named different things. We see Novi Saks, New Sans, and we see who would have been using these different names at different times. My ancestors, while when they lived there, it was Novi Sans, they're German speakers. So they're going to be using the German name of the town, even if it's not technically called that at the time. The other thing, if you see the little JewishGen icon next to the name of the town under Modern Town and Country, you're going to click that, and it's going to open up an entire breakdown of this town. It's going to give you links to the Yizkor books. It's going to give you the Kehelia links. It's going to give you the Jewish cemetery links. It's going to tell you about what Holocaust memorial exists. What are the historical Jewish populations of this? If you scroll down, it's going to give you more external links. I always highly recommend that you go to the Town Finder. Even if you think you're familiar with the town, you're going to learn new things. We also do update them as often as we can. And even I find new things on these all the time. I highly recommend it. And it does, again, give you context. So how do you find records in the town? I like Miriam Weiner's site, Routes to Roots. It's a great source for knowing what exists. You go there, you put in the town, and they tell you this is what exists at what time. These are what documents exist and what archive they're living in. Family search. Go into the catalog, type in the name of the town, see what they have scanned. JewishGen, obviously, we have millions of records and we're adding more regularly. For Polish and what I call Polish-ish, which means also Galicia, regions that, Prussia, regions that may not be Poland now sometimes, but were Poland historically, or are Poland now, but weren't historically. JRI Poland is going to be a fantastic resource. Gesher Galicia for the Galicianers, and the Polish archival site. So the Polish government archives has a massive amount of documents digitized. They underwent a pretty comprehensive digitization campaign, which is still going on to this day. And if they have it in their catalog and they don't have it scanned, ask. Sometimes they'll scan it for free, or they have the digitized copies, they just haven't put them up. And if they do have to digitize it for you, it's a pretty nominal fee. Litvak SIG, research divisions, and special interest groups in general. Go to the people who are also interested in the town. And also Google. It sounds very weird. I like using Google Books quite a lot. I'll sometimes just start throwing search terms at it because somebody may have written about exactly what I'm looking for. So, okay, you have this record. It's in German, it's in Polish, it's in Russian. Well, now what do you do? So format for different towns differs by the year, by the location, and by what kind of record it is. That makes sense. Birth certificates, death certificates in America are different by year as well. So first thing first, I tell people don't solely rely on an index. The original record may have been misspelled. There may be additional marginal notes, or it just may have been a really difficult transcription. So how do we do it? We go through their family search has vocabulary guides that are genealogically relevant words that are used. If you're looking at Russian, Steve Morse's site has basically a tool I like to call it. I use it to what I refer to as brute force Russian occasionally, where it will let you do cursive to modern day Cyrillic, and you just throw in the letters. You click until you get the right thing. There are Facebook groups for this. We actually have a thing on JewishGen, ViewMate. We have Google Translate, although I don't tend to recommend it for this just because it lacks context. And then if you're really stuck, paid translators, I've definitely had to employ them on times when I'm dealing with something that just doesn't exist in the modern realm and you need somebody who is an academic or a specialist to take a look at it. So what do I mean by, reading the record is going to have additional information? This is the birth of my great-great-grandmother, Zussel Grun. It's right there. Now in this it says her parents are Mendel and Neche. However, if you see the itty-bitty writing up top, that's a correction. That's called her father came and said, hey, her mother isn't Neche, her mother's Leah Hockhauser. What are you doing? This isn't right. So there's this nice little note. So, okay, well, that's useful, but, are we sure? Well, sure enough, on my great-grandfather's birth record, when it discusses his mother, it says Zussel, maiden name's Green, single, because remember, he's technically illegitimate, in Novi Sans, New Sans, the daughter of Mendel Grun, and Leah, whose last name is forgotten, of Novi Sans. Okay, last name's forgotten. Pull up one of Zussel's sisters. We have mom's information, Leah, born Hockhauser. Married name is Grun. The daughter of Kiva and Zussel Hockhauser. So that tells us two things. First of all, gives us her maiden name. It confirms that addition on the birth record is correct. Second of all, it tells us that my great-great-grandmother is named after her grandmother, Zussel. So how do we find these original documents? I'm going to give you an example using my husband's family because my husband's family has been in America for about a century longer than mine. So, surname, Waas. Going USA database. Great. We have these wonderful obituaries from Philly. I know he has family in Philly. Fabulous. We'll grab it. Okay, so we have the Philadelphia Jewish Exponent, and it has obituaries. You click there. Most people don't know this. If you click the title of the record set on JewishGen, it will bring you to a new page. That new page will have additional information. It will tell you where the records are from and often how you can get a copy of them. So in this case, we have all of this information. We can see that the Jewish Genealogical Society of Greater Philadelphia compiled this. We can see what these have in them. What is the contents? Am I not going to find, if I'm looking for something specific and it's not going to be in the contents, it's good to know that. And we can see how we can view the actual records. And it gives us a whole list, tells us what the microfilm numbers are if you're accessioning it that way. It's a ton of information. That's how you get the original. So now for a fun one. And this is an interesting part of the lecture because I actually just added in these slides recently. These are what I like to call the cheat codes. What does that mean? These are things that I did not even know how to do on our site until about a year ago. These are things that most professional genealogists, most regular users of JewishGen have no idea exist and are built into the code. So even if you've been at this for a very long time, even if you're old hat at this, I promise you're probably going to learn something new. So we know these. We're going to start with the basics of the search. There's exact spellings. Exact spelling does often also provide synonyms. So Yankel might also pop up Jacob, Jack. Jacob starts with. It's in the name. Anything that starts with those letters that you're putting in. Fuzzy, fuzzier, and fuzziest. What does that mean? I like it for when the original record might be extremely difficult to read because somebody was writing down information that they had no right writing down because they should never have ever been allowed to pick up a pen in the first place because their handwriting was criminal. Or, it might be misspelled because many, many other reasons, or it might have just been really difficult for the indexer to read. My husband has a name in his family, Multianer. This can be spelled a billion different ways, which is further complicated by the fact that this is in the former Russian Empire. So I like to use fuzzy specifically with this last name because I know that no matter how many different iterations of it I throw at the wall, there's always going to be one more that I've never seen in my life and that really nobody could conceive of except for the person that wrote it down. Sounds like is going to give you similar sounding names. Phonetic is similar. They're two different sound searches. And then contains, it's going to be anywhere in the name. Those are super self-explanatory. Those are the basic search tools. Now for, again, the cheat codes. Again, these are going to be pretty simple. There's a thing on the site that says this. Comma is going to give you an or. So it gives you any document with either name. So this would give me any document with Schwartz or any document with a Weiss. Space is and. Schwartz-Weiss gives you any document with both names. So if you're looking for example, Schwartz who married a Weiss, there you go. Again, these are pretty self-explanatory. But what happens when you include brackets? If I'm looking for fish, the surname Viss and Weiss might pop up. But I don't want those names. I want fish. So I put the F into brackets. That is going to ensure that every result I get has the F in the name. This is essential when you're dealing with names that might have phonetic matches that while they are phonetically similar, they're definitely not going to be what you're looking for. So this is going to give me fish, fizz, but not viz or vice. Similarly, we have wildcards. If there's bad handwriting on a marriage record, which we often run into, where you can only read the first or the last letter, or you can read the first letter, maybe there's a D in the middle and then there's a G at the end, but what is this name? Use a wildcard. That asterisk basically is saying I want any combination of letters in between. So if I have a marriage that could be spelling, it could be Sperling, or maybe just the kids later on in life say, oh yeah, my mother's maiden name is Sperling. Well, I said my mother's maiden name is Spelling. This accounts for any of those. Again, these are extremely little known tools on the JewishGen website, and I highly recommend using them. So I'm nearing the end of this. I am going to touch on the Holocaust and genealogy in brief. That is another entire lecture. Essentially, keep in mind that not all murders are recorded. Not all records survived. If you find out what happened to your town first, again, context. Holocaust Memorial Museum has a Holocaust encyclopedia. It is an excellent academic source. Our website also has Yizkor books. Again, go back, search your town, and on that page, you're going to see the Yizkor book. The Yizkor book is what I like to call a eulogy for the town. It is who was there, what was this town's life like, and how did it die? Other records to use, you're going to use the Arlson Archives website, USHMM's People Search, Yad Vashem, Strati, which is a fantastic Polish site that I see very underutilized, Yizkor books, our Holocaust database, and there are also regional specific websites if you poke around on the internet. Again, there's so much to say here. It's another lecture entirely. When you're doing Holocaust research, I will say this, practice self-care. Paul mentioned at the beginning that I started out doing forensic work on high-value estate cases. Most of those were estates of Holocaust survivors where I had to prove what happened to every member of the extended family. I have been doing this professionally for almost 13 years at this point. I have had times when I have had to step away and say, no, I can't keep doing this. I have to take a break. I have to take care of myself because this is going to weigh on me. So if you are doing Holocaust research, do not be ashamed to step back and say, okay, I need to take a breather. So let's put all of these things together. So I mentioned earlier, Leah, born Hockhauser, married and Grum, the daughter of Kiva, and the deceased Sussel, living and born in Novi Sans. Cool, great, that's what this says. Tells me quite a lot about my third great grandmother, but I want to know more. So I go on JRI Poland, I look for a Hockhauser, a Kiva, and Novi Sans. I get 6 records, which is great. I have these 2 fantastic records for 2 children born to Kiva and Soso Hockhauser. Well, that's fantastic. That's the right names. They're twins, but there's no other children born to this couple. They don't appear in any of the censuses that survive. So what happens? This original record, it's pretty conclusive. But there are also births later on to a Kiva and Rudel Hockhauser. Could this be the same man? So I pulled the 1870 Novi census, and this is going to be the extract. Okay, it tells me Jacob and Zlata Hockhauser, who were born in 1803 and 1806, Abraham Mendel, Kiva, Reisel, gives us all this information about the whole family, including a daughter named Leah. That could be my Leah, but the mother's name is wrong. So you go to Gesher Galicia, you pull the original document. And what it tells me here is the final little piece of that puzzle, because on the original document, but not on the index, it notes that Rudel is the second wife, which means that he was a widower when he married her. So my Zussel, the Zussel that my second great-grandmother was named for, she died probably around the time that she had the twins in 1854, because that's the last time she appears on any written record. That little bit of context moved us from this could be the right man to, okay, this could be the right man. See the difference? So who are Jacob and Zlata in this household? They're probably Kiva's parents. We know that. But where's my proof? They're appearing in the same census. They probably are, but again, I like proof. Leah and Mendel have a son named Jakob Kiva in 1877. So that's my great-great-grandparents. Okay, and Yaakov owns the house, according to the Gesher Galicia indexes, as early as 1846. So I do a little Googling, and I find on a university website that the local gazette is indexed. It's a full text search, OCR. So, okay, he's living in the same house for all this time. They must have had a little bit of money coming from the estate world. So I look for an estate, and sure enough, this tells me that Jakob Hockhauser has died. That his son, that the people who are to inherit his estate are his son, Kiva Hockhauser, his daughter, Hannah Perlroth, his son, Abraham Mendel Hockhauser's daughter, Sima Grunspan, his daughter, Rachel Eber, and the son of Abraham Mendel, who's Moses. This gives me the whole family set in a time period in which there would have been no vital records when they were born. So that's my breakthrough. Again, it's taking everything together as opposed to separate things. So I know that I am running up on time, so I'm going to open it up for questions. Okay.
Thank you so much, Caitlin, for a fantastic presentation. That was really fascinating. Um, uh, I'd like to invite people now to submit questions into the chat. I know there were some that came along, but if you could resubmit them now, that would be amazing. And we'll read them. I have a question, which actually was from the chat, which was, a lot of these original documents they're all, no, they're not all, but many of them are handwritten. How do you decipher the bad handwriting? Do you have any shortcuts that you could share with us?
Not really. A lot of it isn't going to be shortcuts, which I know isn't the best answer, but with some of it, I actually taught myself how to write the script in question, which is the opposite of a shortcut, but sometimes there isn't a shortcut. Sometimes I have to keep revisiting. Occasionally, I'll post it to a group of other genealogists and be like, hey, what do you think this person is trying to say? Because I can't make any sense of this. And sometimes somebody will have a better idea. I have a dear friend of mine who's a surgical nurse who occasionally I'll run into some particularly terrible doctor handwriting and be like, hey, you have enough educational background and experience reading doctor handwriting for this. Help me. So a lot of the time, don't be afraid to ask for help. Don't be afraid to sort of crowdsource, but there isn't really any quick and easy answer.
All right, thank you for that. We do have some more questions here. Uh, okay, so let me just go back up a little bit. Um, Somebody asked if you have a YouTube channel. No, not yet. Okay. How does Romanian or Bessarabian genealogy differ, or is it basically all the same?
So it's all going to be regional. Again, different laws are impacting different cultural norms, different naming traditions, and also just what records are available and where they live. Really, everywhere is going to be a little bit different, and my answer is usually just going to be the context.
Okay. Um, Somebody asked about the Chat GBT and the
No,
AI.
no, no. ChatGPT will, if it does not know the answer, will make something up. No, it's not going to be a good translator or transcriber here. There's other ways to do it, but um, that's not going to be the tool to use in this case.
Okay. Thank you for that. Um, Here's a question. I'm not sure I really understand it, but I'll read it to you anyway, which is how do we record the various names, Yiddish, Hebrew, and their name in the homeland, their names in the US, and how do we record both the place given the different names shown as shown as Jewish Gen? I guess how do we deal with these different versions of the
So,
names?
I mean, it depends on how you really want to do it. At the end of the day, if you're building a tree, it's for your use. It's going to be what is most digestible for you. Tell you what I usually do is I will use the name that they use the most in life or really at the time that they die. I'll put whatever the original name was in parentheses, and then maybe I'll put the religious name at the end in parentheses where a suffix would usually go, just because that's going to be where I'm going to find it most often. But it really is dependent on you, on what program you're using and what you prefer. Similarly with towns, if I'm writing about it, I'll use the town at the time of the event. But if I'm using a family tree program, just because most of them don't have things like the Austro-Hungarian Empire built into them, I'll add in a note that says, hey, by the way, at this time, the town was called this.
Oh, thank you for that. Um, okay, so we have a few more. We have a bunch of questions here. Let me just see which ones are most appropriate for our talk today. I also wanted to say, by the way, if people have really specific questions, this is probably not the best place to ask them, but if you have a general question that's going to be relevant to a lot of people, it's this is a good time to ask questions. Here's one. For ancestors who mention birth villages which don't really show up in Jewish Gen, any advice on finding records for these places?
So I actually have a lot of these myself. A lot of my ancestors, for some reason, seem to like really itty bitty towns where there are like 50 people and only they're the only Jews. In those cases, it's a few different options. First of all, find out where the town where anybody is registering is. So figure out where the nearest large Jewish community is. In some cases, I've found school records to be very useful, especially with my Galicianers who like the tiniest towns one could possibly imagine. Um, a lot of times it's just working around it. It's not the best answer, I know, but there's really no one size fits all. But typically, when you're looking at a teeny tiny jurisdiction, they'll have somewhere where they are registering. It's just not going to be exactly where they're living.
Thank you for that. Let's see here. Here's a question. I have an ancestor who in family lore says became a rabbi in Jerusalem. How do I find that out? And the person who asked has that name. So how do we find out about a some sort of like legendary ancestor like that?
So there are a couple of different options. If you know the person's name, again, I'm going to advocate searching. If you know that, they may have been fairly well known, looking for sources from that period tend to be very useful. I always advocate the 1906 Jewish Encyclopedia because it is a really good snapshot of life at that moment. Um, really looking through what one wouldn't typically consider a genealogical source. So looking at, did this person write books? Check different repositories of religious books, see if they wrote a book. Often they'll have given their genealogy at the beginning, which is an incredible find when you have it. I was once working on a project where I was trying to connect a group of women that I was certain were sisters, found that their father had written a book, and in the beginning of his book, he lists off all of his brilliant daughters, which also just made me smile in general. So with that, it really is going into looking for religious records, finding lists of rabbis, of which there are many, or seeing if there's a mention of him in a book. That's going to be a situation which you're going to want to search in Hebrew, not in English, would be pretty much my my big recommendation there.
Um, this is sort of specific, but since it's an important community, I'm going to ask it anyway. Have you had success in finding vital records from Warsaw and Praga, which is a suburb of
And
Warsaw?
I actually did genealogy deathmatch at IAJGS in Philadelphia, the International Association of Jewish Genealogical Societies. Genealogy deathmatch is a absolutely ridiculous contest in which two genealogists go head to head to, in under a minute, prove generations of their family back as far as they can go. And I accomplished 12 generations from Warsaw, Praga. The records absolutely exist. They're going to be in Russian, some of them are going to be in Polish, some of them are even going to be in Latin. The cemetery survives in large part. It's absolutely doable. Newspapers are also very useful in that region, as many people have heard me joke about sometimes, but it's not so much of a joke because it is true. I have a fantastic Praga-based ancestor who I have the incredible lurid details of his 30-year-long crime spree throughout Warsaw. So you can most certainly find things, and you can find things that are more than just the dates. You can find that dash.
Thank you for that. What about a couple people asked about school records. Um, I was just maybe you could say, how do we find those kinds of records?
So that depends on where they're from. I've actually had a lot of luck with Family Search having digitized school records. Otherwise, oftentimes the archives of the country will have them. I've found school records in both the Lithuanian and in the Polish archives.
Okay, thank you. Um, Here's a question. I think it's a pretty interesting question. Of course, I just lost it, but um, here we go. What are good ways to search for family names that were changed in the Russian Empire to avoid the draft into the Tsarist army?
So that's going to be when you're going to start cross-referencing familial information. So an unusual double name is always going to be very useful there. It's also going to be very useful when you're dealing with an immigrant in a time or a place when immigration information really isn't recorded. Um, but that's going to be one of those things that can honestly result in an actual brick wall. If there's no way to determine, if this person's father's name was Abraham, you may be able to narrow it down. You may be able to find a couple of couples that have the parents' names correct. But unless somebody wrote it down at some point and connected the two people, you may not have a way to know. And it really just depends on the individual case. It can be done, but it's not always doable.
Um, Thank you for that. Is there a recommended way to search for the old country town of origin when the U.S. immigration and census records and ship lists only list, a country like Russia?
So that's going to be when you're going to start to use other things. So, like I said, look at the what congregation are they marrying at? Is the congregation attached to a town? Where are they buried? Are they in a burial society that's connected to a town? Are they Do they have additional family members? Often, even if, I'm researching the earliest member of a family who comes to America and we'll say 1885 or goes to London in 1885, and there's nothing, they died before the 1921 UK census, there's nothing that says the town they're from. They might have a brother, and the brother might tell me where the town is from. They might have a sister, they might bring a cousin over later on. So in that case, you're going to sort of adhere to what I refer to a lot, which is Jews do not exist in a vacuum. We do not go somewhere and then just like never contact anybody ever again. I don't think we're physically capable of that, to be completely honest. So yeah, it would be looking for the rest of the family, trying to find other connections, looking for who are you interacting with, where are you buried, where are you marrying.
Thank you for that. Let's go for a few more minutes, then we should probably wrap up. But we do have a lot of questions, so I don't know if Caitlin, if you have the time, maybe we could go for a few. Um, Here's a question. How often do you use DNA in your research?
It really depends. I use it fairly often, but it really just depends on what the research question is. I had a brick wall that I broke through really the only way that it could have been broken through was through that specific ancestor's male descendants, so using Y-DNA. Um, on other lines, I've had DNA confirm things for me or give me whole new questions. And the same thing with everybody I've worked with. It really depends on what you're looking to get out of it. If you know for sure, all this stuff and all these people are 100% related, which we can't all know for sure, but we'll say we know for sure. It really depends on what you're looking to get out of it. I like to utilize DNA. It's one tool in the toolkit. It's a very big tool. It's a very useful tool, but it's one tool in the toolkit.
Right. Thank you. Thank you for that. What about police records? So I'll read you the question. Is it possible to find and search police records and discover if my grandfather's name shows up? The story is that he was hunted by the police in Odessa around 1911.
So that would be extremely locationally dependent. It really depends. I would honestly look in regional newspapers, would be one of my first things. If somebody's wanted by the police, you're going to find them in regional newspapers. Again, I'll cite a member of my husband's family. They were considered draft dodging in Mohilev. In reality, they had just moved to New York, but it's the 1880s. So there's this nice little thing that goes out in the newspapers. It says, hey, we're looking for these people. And this is a list of the entire extended family. So you may get lucky and be able to find that. It really does depend.
Okay, thank you. Let's see here. Um, so some people asked about hiring a genealogist. Um, what can you say about that?
I mean, it is a pretty wide question. I'd always recommend going through the Association of Professional Genealogists. Um, yeah,
Okay, thank you for that. Uh,
yeah, it's going to be something it's more specific really depends on where the region is and everything.
so and here's a question, and I can answer it if you don't want to answer it about so this person visited the Warsaw archives and she found a couple of Isker books in English and more that were in Hebrew. And what are the status of the English translation of Isker books?
So we are currently working on those. That is a major initiative of JewishGen. So that's ongoing, essentially.
And we have
Um,
how many Isker books have we translated so far?
I know it's over 200 at this point.
Yeah.
I did see that a few people are asking about early London Jewish records and early UK Jewish records. I have a very specific source for you for that. There's a website site called Synagogue Scribes that specifically records these early pre-civil registry British Jewish records. It is an essential source. I highly recommend it. It has a number of things, will extracts. So I do see a number of questions in general that are UK specific. It's absolutely doable. I see questions about how much is the Jewish Gen database built on the original sources and the information from the researchers themselves. It's going to be, again, source dependent, but by and large, it is extracts from the original document. Most of the time if you're looking at birth, marriage, or death, it is an extract from that original document, a transcription. However, if you ever have questions about a database, click through and see where that database comes from, what it contains. That information is also going to include, you know, how it was transcribed, whether it is the original information or whether there was additional information added.
So hold on one second here, everyone. So the name of the London source is Synagogue Scribes.
Yes,
Okay. Is it one word, Synagogue Scribes?
it's a website. So
Synagogue
yes, yes,
Scribes.com or .org.
yeah, .com. It's extremely useful. There's you know, they have burial records from 1770s. It's very useful. I
Um,
found it to be invaluable.
Somebody asked about ViewMate. Maybe you could tell us a little bit about that.
So I don't utilize it enough to really go into
So
it. I mean, do you
I,
want to go into it or I
yeah,
can
let me
discuss it?
just,
I, I mean, it basically you post a photograph or a document and ask for help translating. You say, hey, I would like to know, can you help me? And you submit an image, it can be viewed for 7 days, and then people will respond, say, hey, this is what's in it, this is what isn't in it, all that information.
right. Okay. Thank you for that. Um, Somebody asks here, do you think the interest in Jewish genealogy will continue for future generations, in future generations?
I mean, why not? It's continued since, I mean, I believe that half of the Torah is begat, begat, begat. I mean, it's been, people are interested in where they come from. If anything, people become more interested in it over time. I'm, I've been in some way, shape, or form involved in genealogy or interested in genealogy for over 20 years, by and large, the vast majority of my life. It absolutely is something. I've had people come into the center here at the Calico Center who are, I had very recently my first Gen Alpha genealogist come in, which was a wild incident, but in general, absolutely. Why
Cool,
wouldn't it?
cool. Somebody asked about a little earlier about finding information about burial societies.
So that's going to be one where you're going to, again, you're going to want to search it. You want to see, okay, is there an archive for this? I know that if you're looking in the New York area, the genealogical societies here, the JGSs here, have done a lot of work on recording the histories of these burial societies, but a lot of it is going to be going in and searching. If the cemetery is still active, contact the cemetery. Say, hey, what do you know? What do you have on file about this burial society? But yeah, a lot of it is going to be, and I know this sounds so odd to say, but a lot of it is going to be Google with burial societies in particular.
Right,
Yeah,
right. Um, I think we've answered most of the major questions. If people have more questions, can they send me an email and I can forward it to you?
that would work absolutely.
Okay, excellent. So I want to take a moment to thank Caitlin Hollander Waas for a wonderful presentation. I learned a lot, and based on the questions and the comments, I think everybody on the call learned a lot as well. Um, uh,
And
yeah.
I can send out my slides. That's not a
Oh,
problem.
thank you. Okay,
I
that
see
was one of
people
the
keep
questions.
asking.
Yeah, yeah. Thank you for that. And hopefully, Caitlin will get you to speak for on other topics as well in the near future. But on behalf of everybody here and myself, thank you so much for a really great presentation. Again, just want to remind everybody that on November 12th, we have Sarah Benor, who's going to be talking about Jewish languages. And on November 19th, we have George Blumen, who'll be talking about Sugihara and the descendants of the Sugihara Jews. So please join us for that. And we are scheduling other programs even now. So please stay tuned and you'll hear about more programs coming up. Thank you so much, everybody. And thank you, Caitlin.